This is HOA Control Freaks, and the timeline is absurd. Welcome in. This one is going to test your patience, but stick with me, because the payoff is worth it. I am writing this down, Barbara said, jabbing her pen at a policy memo she had just shoved into my chest. The memo overwrote the bylaws, she screamed, and I was in violation retroactive to last Tuesday. Her voice echoed off the townhouse siding. My hands were still on my keys, carabiner clipped to my belt, truck idling behind me in the guest lot. I had 30 seconds to clock in for my FedEx-style route shift, and she was telling me my car was getting towed. This is Duluth, Minnesota, the Silverleaf Design Review Association. I am a route driver who cannot afford a single tow delay because my lease addendum ties my standing to the HOA, and my job runs on strict dispatch windows. Barbara Parker is the rules enforcement chair, and she loves warning letters the way some people love coffee. She had a file cart next to her, thick with folders, and she claimed she had a history on my address going back years. The policy memo was laminated. She waved it like a flag. The parking rules changed 2 weeks ago, she said. Guest spots are now 30-minute limits. Your vehicle has been here for 41 minutes. I glanced at my phone. I had been inside my unit for 23 minutes. I told her that. She smiled and tapped the laminated sheet. We can tow first and explain later, she said. That is how enforcement works. I asked her to show me the notice. She said there was no notice required for active enforcement. I asked her to show me the rule change announcement. She said it was posted on the portal. I pulled up the portal on my phone. The most recent parking post was from 6 months ago. She leaned over my shoulder and said the post was archived. I asked where. She said I would have to file a records request. I took a breath. I asked her if she was seriously threatening to tow my work vehicle over a rule she could not prove existed. She said she did not have to prove anything to me. You can be mad, or you can be compliant, she said. That line landed like a slap. A landscaping contractor was trimming hedges 20 feet away, pretending not to listen. He had his earbuds in, but I saw him glance over twice. Barbara did not care. She pulled out her phone and started typing. I am documenting this interaction, she said. You are being hostile and non-cooperative. I told her I was not being hostile. I was asking for the rule. She said my tone was hostile. I said my tone was confused. She said confusion was not an excuse for non-compliance. I asked her how I was supposed to comply with a rule I had never seen. She said ignorance of the rules was not a defense. I asked her to show me the tow authorization. She pulled a slip from her jacket pocket and held it out between us, fingers pinching the corner. The format looked off. The letterhead was just text. No logo. I asked if I could take a photo. She yanked it back. Absolutely not, she said. This is official HOA business. The breeze picked up. Porch lights were turning on all down the row. I could see neighbors peeking through blinds. Barbara loved an audience. She stepped closer and lowered her voice. This is not the first time your address has been a problem, she said. We have a thick file. Complaints going back 3 years. Late fees, late payments, non-compliance notices, all documented. I froze. I had lived here for 11 months. I asked her what she was talking about. She said the previous tenant. I told her I was not responsible for a previous tenant. She said the violations attached to the address, not the person. I asked her to show me the file. She patted the cart. It is all here, she said. But records requests take 10 business days, and the tow is happening in 10 minutes. I felt my pulse in my ears. I looked at the cart. It was one of those rolling wire baskets stuffed with manila folders. Some had labels, some did not. I asked her if she was serious. She smiled. You can comply now, or you can fight it later and rack up storage fees. I moved my truck. I had no choice. The shift was non-negotiable, and a tow would cost me $200 plus whatever Barbara decided to pile on. I drove to the main lot, parked in my assigned space, and ran back to my unit to grab my work bag. My phone buzzed. A portal notification. Barbara had posted a violation notice with my address and a timestamp. The post said I had been warned verbally and refused to comply. It said I had been hostile and intimidating. It said I had 48 hours to submit a written response or face a $50 administrative fee. I screenshotted everything. I texted my friend Eric, a local paralegal who had helped me organize paperwork when I signed the lease. I told him what happened. He called me back in 2 minutes. "That is not normal," he said. Tow threats without written notice are legally shaky, and attaching old violations to a new tenant is not allowed under Minnesota HOA law unless they are liens. He told me to file a records request immediately and to document every interaction. I filed the request that night. I asked for all parking rule changes in the last year, all violation notices tied to my address, and all board meeting minutes related to enforcement policy. The management company replied the next morning. Records requests require a $10 processing fee and 10 business days. I paid the fee. I started a timeline document. I wrote down every detail: the time, the threat, the cart, the slip, the portal post. I saved the screenshot. I clipped the audio from my dash cam, which had caught the whole interaction from the truck. Barbara did not wait. 2 days later, she sent an email blast to the entire neighborhood portal. The subject line was compliance reminder. The body was 3 paragraphs about how one resident had repeatedly refused to follow parking guidelines and had created a hostile environment for volunteers. She did not name me, but she included my building number. Neighbors started replying. Some said they had seen my truck in the guest lot. Some said they appreciated Barbara keeping standards high. One said I should just follow the rules like everyone else. I replied to the thread. I kept it calm. I said I had moved my truck immediately when asked. I had filed a records request to review the rule change, and I was waiting for a response. I said I welcomed any clarification from management. Barbara replied within minutes. "This is not a debate," she wrote. "The rules are clear, and selective enforcement is not acceptable. Residents who refuse to comply will be held accountable." Selective enforcement. That phrase stuck. I looked at the guest lot every day for a week. I counted 8 different vehicles that stayed longer than 30 minutes. None of them got notices. None of them got threats. I took photos with timestamps. I noted the plate numbers and the spaces. I added it all to my timeline document. The records came back in 9 days. The parking rule change was real, but the effective date was 4 days after Barbara threatened me. The rule had not existed when she said it did. The board minutes showed the vote happened at a meeting I could have attended, but the notice had been posted on the portal the same day as the meeting, 6 hours before it started. Minnesota law requires 72 hours notice for board meetings. The minutes also showed that Barbara had been the one who proposed the rule, and she had pushed it through with a voice vote and no discussion. I went back through the old violations she had mentioned. The file, she said, went back 3 years. The records request did not include those. I called management. They said violation files were tied to owner accounts, not addresses, and they could not release records for a previous tenant without a court order. I asked if there were any liens on my address. They said no. I asked if there were any unpaid balances. They said no. I asked if Barbara had access to files for previous tenants. They paused. Board members have access to certain records for enforcement purposes, the manager said, but they are supposed to request them through us. I asked if Barbara had requested files from my address. The manager said she would have to check. She called me back an hour later. Barbara had pulled records from my address 3 weeks before I moved in, the manager said. But those records were for the owner account, not the tenant. The previous tenant had left 2 years ago. The owner had been in compliance since then. I asked what the records showed. The manager hesitated. "I cannot share details without a formal request," she said. "But I can tell you that the enforcement actions from 3 years ago were closed and resolved. There are no active violations." 3 years ago. Barbara had said the file went back 3 years. I asked Eric what that meant. He said it sounded like Barbara was holding old records and trying to reuse them. "That is not legal," he said. "Violations have to be current and specific. You cannot just recycle accusations." He told me to file a complaint with the board and to request a hearing. I filed the complaint. I attached the timeline, the screenshots, the dashcam audio, the photos of other vehicles in the guest lot, and the records packet showing the rule had not existed when Barbara threatened me. I said Barbara had made false statements, used her position to intimidate me, and violated my due process rights by threatening enforcement without written notice or proof of a rule violation. I requested a hearing and asked that Barbara recuse herself from any decision involving my case. The board responded in 3 days. They scheduled a hearing for 2 weeks out. They said Barbara would not be present as a decision-maker, but she would be allowed to present her side as the enforcement chair. They said I could bring witnesses and evidence. They said the hearing would be recorded. Barbara sent me a private message the next day. "You are making this harder than it needs to be," she wrote. "I am trying to help you avoid fees and legal action. If you withdraw your complaint, I will recommend the board waive the administrative fee. If you do not, I will have no choice but to document your continued noncompliance and pursue formal sanctions." I did not reply. I forwarded the message to Eric. He said it was a threat and probably a violation of the board code of conduct. He told me to keep it and to bring it to the hearing. The next week, Barbara escalated. She showed up at my door on a Saturday morning with a clipboard and a tape measure. She said she was conducting a compliance inspection. I asked if she had given notice. She said enforcement inspections did not require notice. I asked what she was inspecting. She said general compliance. I asked for a checklist. She said it was internal. I told her I was not letting her in without a written notice and a clear reason. She said that was fine, she could inspect from the exterior. She walked around my unit, taking photos of the porch, the windows, the doormat. She measured the distance from my door to the walkway. She took notes on the clipboard. She took a photo of my mailbox. She took a photo of the guest lot from my porch. She did not say a word. When she finished, she handed me a piece of paper. It was a compliance notice, dated that day, listing 4 violations: unapproved doormat, porch clutter, mall-worded, improper storage of personal items, work bag on the porch for 30 seconds while I unlocked the door, and failure to maintain exterior cleanliness in the corner. F. The porch ceiling. I stared at the notice. Each violation carried a $25 fine. Total, $100. The notice said I had 7 days to correct the violations and submit photographic proof of compliance, or the fines would double. I took photos of the doormat. It was a plain black rectangle that said nothing. I took photos of the plant. It was a 6-inch succulent in a ceramic pot. I took photos of my porch. It was spotless except for the spider web, which I wiped away with a paper towel. I took photos of the bag. It was inside by the time she handed me the notice. I took photos of the empty porch after I cleaned the spider web. I uploaded everything to the portal with a response. I said the doormat and plant were standard items allowed under the design guidelines. The bag had been on the porch for less than a minute, and the spider web had been removed. I attached photos with timestamps. Barbara replied publicly. "Doormats and potted plants require design review approval," she wrote. "The guidelines state that all exterior decorations must be submitted for review before installation. Failure to obtain approval is a violation regardless of the item. You have 5 days to submit a design review application or remove the items." I pulled up the design guidelines. They were a 30-page PDF. I searched for doormat. 0 results. I searched for potted plant. 0 results. I searched for porch decorations. The only mention was a clause about holiday decorations and a clause about permanent fixtures. Nothing about doormats or small plants. I screenshotted the search results and posted them. I said the guidelines did not require approval for these items and asked Barbara to cite the specific section. She did not reply. Instead, she posted a new thread. "Design review applications are required for any exterior modification or addition," she wrote. "This includes but is not limited to paint, fixtures, decorations, landscaping, and personal items visible from the street. Residents who fail to apply will be subject to fines and enforcement action. You can be mad, or you can be compliant." That line again. I swallowed my anger, because I knew the moment to use it was coming. Eric told me to document everything and to bring it to the hearing. He said Barbara was clearly trying to bury me in paperwork and fees, so I would give up. He said the strategy was common: pile on small violations, make compliance impossible, and then claim the resident as hostile or non-cooperative when they push back. He said the key was to show the pattern and to force the board to see that Barbara was the problem, not me. I kept digging. I went back to the cold case. The records from 3 years ago? I filed a second records request. this time asking for all enforcement actions related to my address for the past 5 years, all board correspondence mentioning my address, and all design review applications submitted by the previous owner or tenant. I paid another $10. I waited another 10 days. While I waited, I started talking to neighbors. Quietly. I did not post on the portal. I knocked on doors. I asked if anyone else had dealt with Barbara. 3 people said yes. One had been fined for a lawn ornament that Barbara said violated the guidelines, even though the same ornament was in 5 other yards. One had been threatened with a lien over a late payment that the bank confirmed had been processed on time. One had been told their car would be towed for parking in their own driveway overnight, a rule that did not exist. All 3 had photos, emails, and receipts. None of them had filed complaints. They said it was not worth it. Barbara always won, they said. I asked if they would be willing to submit statements for my hearing. 2 said no. 1 said yes. Her name was Linda. She had been fined $300 2 years ago for a late payment that was not late. She had bank records showing the payment cleared on time, but Barbara had claimed the HOA marked it late anyway because it arrived after the processing cutoff. Linda had paid the fine to avoid a lien. She said she regretted it. If you are going after her, I will help, she said. The second records packet arrived. It was a mess. There were 5 enforcement actions tied to my address over 3 years. 3 were for the previous tenant, who had left 2.5 years ago. 2 were for the owner, both marked resolved. But the dates did not line up. One notice was dated 6 months after the tenant moved out. Another was dated a week before the tenant moved in. I checked the tenant move-in date against the owner records. The tenant had moved in 3 years ago, lived there for 6 months, and moved out. The notice dated a week before move-in was for a parking violation. The notice dated 6 months after move-out was for a noise complaint. Both were signed by Barbara. I called the owner. His name was on the records. He picked up on the second ring. I introduced myself and explained I was renting his unit. I asked if he remembered getting notices from the HOA 3 years ago. He laughed. I got one notice, he said. It was about parking, some mix-up with the guest lot. I sent them proof my tenant had a parking pass and they dropped it. That was it. I asked about the noise complaint. He said he never got a noise complaint. I asked if he still had the parking notice. He said maybe he would check. He called me back that night. He had it. He sent me a photo. The notice was dated 3 weeks before the tenant moved in, not a week. The signature was Barbara's, but the date on the file was wrong. I had 2 mismatched dates. I had one notice that should not exist. I had a noise complaint the owner never received. I pulled up the HOA portal audit log. It was a feature I had not noticed before. It showed every post, edit, and deletion with timestamps and usernames. I searched for my address. There were 3 posts from 3 years ago, all created by Barbara. One was the parking violation. One was the noise complaint. Both had been edited multiple times. The audit log showed the noise complaint had been backdated. The original timestamp was 2 years ago. The edited timestamp was 3 years ago. The edit was made 4 weeks ago, right before I moved in. I sat back. Barbara had backdated a notice. She had edited the file to make it look older than it was. She had used it to justify the thick file claim. She had tried to scare me with a cold case she faked. I called Eric. I walked him through the timeline. He was quiet for a minute. That is fraud, he said. If she backdated enforcement records to create a false history, that is fraud. It is also a breach of fiduciary duty. The board could be liable, and so could she personally. He told me to bring the audit log, the owner's statement, and the bank records Linda had. He said I had enough to flip the hearing into an investigation. If this is making your blood boil, hit subscribe, because the payback is coming, and it is going to be satisfying. I prepped for the hearing. I organized everything into a binder, timeline, screenshots, photos, dashcam audio, records packets, audit log printout, owner statement, Linda's bank records, neighbor photos of other vehicles in the guest lot. I printed 2 copies of the binder, one for me, one for the board. I also printed a 3rd copy of one specific document, a bank confirmation showing my HOA payments had cleared on time every month, and a portal screenshot showing the HOA had marked 2 of them late anyway. That was my trump card. I did not put it in the binder. I kept it in a thick envelope with a tracking label turned away. I was holding that for the right moment. The hearing was scheduled for 7 p.m. at the clubhouse. I got there at 6:45. The parking lot was full. I saw Barbara's car. I saw Linda's car. I saw 3 board members I recognized from photos on the portal. I grabbed my binder and the envelope and headed inside. The clubhouse meeting room was set up like a small courtroom. A long table at the front for the board, rows of chairs for residents, a podium in the middle. Barbara was already there, sitting in the front row with her file cart next to her. She had a stack of folders on her lap. She did not look at me when I walked in. The board president called the meeting to order at 7. He introduced himself and the other board members. He said the hearing was being recorded and that I would have 15 minutes to present my case, Barbara would have 15 minutes to respond, and then the board would ask questions and deliberate. He asked if I understood. I said yes. I walked to the podium. I opened my binder. I started with the timeline. I walked the board through the first interaction, the threat, the laminated memo, the tow slip, the cart. I played the dashcam audio. Barbara's voice came through the speakers. We can tow first and explain later. That is how enforcement works. The room went silent. One board member leaned forward. Another took notes. I moved to the rule change. I showed the records packet proving the rule did not exist when Barbara threatened me. I showed the meeting minutes proving the rule was passed with improper notice. I showed the photos of other vehicles in the guest lot with no enforcement. I said this was selective enforcement. I moved to the compliance inspection. I showed the notice with the 4 violations. I showed the design guidelines with 0 mentions of doormats or plants. I showed Barbara's portal post claiming all exterior items required approval. I said she was making up rules to justify fines. I moved to the cold case. I showed the audit log. I showed the backdated noise complaint. I showed the owner statement. I said Barbara had faked records to create a false enforcement history and intimidate me into compliance. The board president stopped me. He asked Barbara to explain the audit log. Barbara stood. She said the log was a mistake. She said she had corrected a clerical error. She said the original date was wrong and she had fixed it. The board president asked when she made the correction. She hesitated. 4 weeks ago, she said. The board president asked why she needed to correct a 3-year-old clerical error 4 weeks ago. Barbara said she was updating the files for the annual report. Linda stood up from the back. She said she had a statement. The board president said she could speak after Barbara finished. Linda said it could not wait. She walked to the front. She said Barbara had done the same thing to her 2 years ago. She said Barbara had claimed her payment was late, even though the bank confirmed it cleared on time. She said she had paid a $300 fine to avoid a lien. She said she had bank records proving the payment was on time. She pulled out a folder and handed it to the board president. The board president looked at the records. He looked at Barbara. He asked if she had any response. Barbara said late payments were determined by the processing cutoff, not the bank date. Linda said the processing cutoff was the same day the bank confirmed the payment. Barbara said the cutoff was 5 p.m. and the payment arrived at 5:15. Linda said the bank timestamp was 4:47. She pointed to the record. The board president looked at it. He looked at Barbara. He asked if she had proof the payment arrived at 5:15. Barbara said the records were in the file. She gestured to the cart. The board president asked her to find them. She opened a folder. She flipped through pages. She opened another folder. She flipped through more pages. She did not find it. The board president asked me to continue. I moved to the pattern. I said Barbara had used her position to target residents with fake violations, backdated records, and selective enforcement. I said she had intimidated me, threatened my job, and tried to pile on fines to force me to give up. I said this was not about one parking spot or one doormat. This was about a systemic abuse of power. Barbara interrupted. She stood and walked to the podium. She said I was twisting the facts. She said she was just doing her job. She said enforcement was hard and residents like me made it harder by refusing to follow simple rules. She said I was hostile, non-cooperative, and a drain on volunteer resources. She said the board should fine me for wasting their time. I asked the board president if I could respond. He said yes. I pulled out the envelope. I opened it. I pulled out the bank confirmation and the portal screenshot. I said I had one more piece of evidence. I walked to the front table and placed the documents in front of the board president. I said these were my HOA payment records. I said the bank confirmed every payment cleared on time. I said the portal showed the HOA marked 2 payments late anyway. I said this was proof the HOA was creating late fees where none existed. The board president looked at the documents. He looked at Barbara. He asked if she had marked my payments late. Barbara said she did not handle payments. The board president said her name was on the enforcement notices tied to the late fees. Barbara said those were automatic. The board president asked who set the automatic system. Barbara did not answer. I brought a second copy for the HOA attorney, so the legal risk is obvious, I said. I handed the second envelope to the attorney sitting at the side table. The attorney opened it. He read the documents. He leaned over and whispered to the board president. The board president nodded. The board president said the board would take a short recess to review the evidence. He said the hearing would reconvene in 15 minutes. Everyone stood. Barbara grabbed her card and rolled it toward the door. The landscaping contractor who had been trimming hedges the day she threatened me was standing in the hallway. He was holding his phone. He said he had something to add. He said he had recorded the interaction in the parking lot. He said he heard Barbara threaten to tow first and explain later. He said he thought it might be useful. He handed his phone to the board president. The board president took it. He said they would review it. Barbara tried to leave. The board president asked her to stay. She sat back down. She looked at the floor. She did not look at me. The board reconvened. The board president said the board had reviewed the evidence. He said the audit log, the owner statement, the bank records, and the payment documents raised serious concerns about enforcement practices. He said the board was opening a formal investigation into the compliance process and all enforcement actions taken by Barbara in the last 3 years. He said Barbara was being removed from the enforcement chair position effective immediately. He said she was barred from acting as an enforcer or investigator pending the outcome of the investigation. He said a neutral hearing officer would be appointed to review all active violations and determine which ones were valid. He said my violations were being dismissed. He said the fines were being waived. He said the parking rule change would be revoted with proper notice. He said the board would issue a public statement clarifying the design guidelines and the enforcement process. He looked at Barbara. He said the board took these matters seriously. He said if the investigation found evidence of fraud or misconduct, the board would refer the matter to legal counsel and consider removal proceedings. Barbara stood. She said this was a witch hunt. She said I had manipulated the facts and turned the board against her. She said she had been volunteering for years and this was how they repaid her. She grabbed her cart and walked out. The door slammed behind her. The room was silent for a moment. Then Linda started clapping. A few other residents joined. The board president said the meeting was adjourned. I packed my binder. I walked out to the parking lot. The tow truck that had been idling the night Barbara threatened me was gone. The guest lot was full. My truck was in my assigned space. I sat in the driver's seat and took a breath. Eric called. He said he heard it went well. I told him it went better than well. He said I should follow up with a formal complaint to the State HOA Oversight Board and consider a small claims case for the fines Linda paid. He said I had a solid case. I told him I would think about it. A week later, the board sent an email to all residents. The subject line was Compliance Process Update. The body said the HOA compliance process was being audited and cleaned up. It said all enforcement actions from the past 3 years were being reviewed for accuracy and consistency. It said residents who believed they had been unfairly fined could request a refund review. It said the board was committed to transparency and fairness. A second email came an hour later. It was from Barbara. She had replied to the board email. She said the board was caving to a resident who refused to follow rules. She said selective enforcement was a myth invented by people who wanted special treatment. She said she stood by every decision she made. She hit reply all. The board attorney replied. He said Barbara's message violated the board code of conduct. He said further public statements about ongoing investigations could result in legal action. He said she should direct all questions to her attorney. Barbara did not reply. 2 weeks later, A board election was scheduled. 3 seats were open. Barbara's seat was one of them. A neighborhood group organized a slate of challengers. One of them was Linda. The election was held online. The turnout was the highest in 5 years. All 3 challengers won. Barbara lost her seat. The vote was not close. The new board voted to refer Barbara's enforcement actions to an independent auditor. The auditor found 12 cases of backdated notices, 8 cases of selective enforcement, and 5 cases of fines assessed without proper documentation. The board issued refunds to 6 residents, including Linda. The total was $1,800. The board also updated the enforcement policy to require written notice, a clear violation citation, and a review process before any fines or towing. Barbara's own selective enforcement got documented in the minutes. Barbara stopped showing up at the clubhouse. She stopped posting on the portal. She sold her unit 3 months later and moved out of state. I stayed. I kept my doormat and my plant. I parked in the guest lot when I needed to, and no one said a word. The new board was not perfect, but they followed the rules, and when they made mistakes, they fixed them. I still have the binder. I still have the envelope. I still have the recording of Barbara saying we can tow first and explain later that is how enforcement works. I play it sometimes when I need a reminder that the system can work if you document everything and refuse to back down. A board election challenge flipped the power dynamic. Karen's own words trapped her. The HOA compliance process got audited and cleaned up. And I got my life back. I appreciate you hanging in there.